Hello everyone, and welcome to the first in a series here out of Sri Lanka from the Oxford College of Business. Today we're introducing this new series called the Insight Dialogue, and my name is Tony Travaglioni. Just a little bit about me. I've held senior academic and business positions across a number of countries in Australia, Singapore, the US, and today, along with my colleague Tracy, who will introduce herself shortly, we're going to be talking about the cultural differences in these various countries that both Tracy and myself have experienced and the implications for doing effective business. Tracy.
Oh, thanks, Tony. It's great to be here in our very first Oxford College of Business podcast, and we're going to talk about, through the Insight Dialogue, all sorts of aspects of what we've experienced in our lives working in different countries and with different cultures within countries. My name's Tracy McPeak, and I'm a principal lecturer in HRM at the University of Bedfordshire, and we work with people, and I think people is the absolute core of most elements of business, and I'm sure we'll touch on that in our conversation today.
Absolutely. So perhaps from a position of most knowledge, let's talk a little bit about the countries that we're most familiar with. And in my case, I'm going to start off with Australia. And just for a little bit of history for everyone, of course, Australia was settled by the English. So initially a very English-orientated culture. But in the 1940s, as a result of the Second World War, Australia had to move more and more towards having greater relationships with the US. And so we've seen that culture of individualism come through. But then more recently, of course, there's been waves of migrants coming to Australia from so many different countries. Initially, we had the European migrants, large numbers of Italians coming after the Second World War. Then we had this wave of Vietnamese migrants in the 1970s, and then very large Chinese migrants, and more recently South Asian. So in terms of creating the Australian culture, it is very diverse these days, and to manage the workforce effectively, one has to really cater for those different migrant groups to manage very effectively, and to understand that the Australian culture that we have now does not resemble anything that looks like a UK culture, US culture, or even the early cultures of the Europeans. So Tracy, I'm just wondering if you can talk us through your significant background there in terms of what country you're most familiar with.
Oh, thank you. So I've had the pleasure of working with colleagues in Oman, so in the Middle Eastern countries. I've also looked after some of our partners in the Caribbean. And again, that's a very different culture, similar sort of background to the colonies, etc. Now they're independent countries, but at the heart of it is still this sort of English core. And I think that needs to be embraced, but also we need to include everybody in these conversations. And just because a culture says learning and education is one thing, doesn't mean to say that that fits the culture that you're going to go and be working with. So we try and be very mindful when we work with our partners that we're looking at different contexts, different understandings. What works in one area might not work in another area. And I think one of the best ways I've ever found is through Mr. Bean cartoons, would you believe? So if you show Mr. Bean cartoon, he doesn't speak at all. But the sort of core of the character coming through in a particular situation really does resonate with people from all over the world. So I think that's quite interesting to understand that you don't necessarily need to be having to speak.
Yes.
You can still get your message, you can still get that understanding through all sorts of different ways. And culturally, that's something I have used in the classroom over the years.
Right.
I've been educating for over 20 years, and I sometimes resort to Mr. Bean just to get that message through and to make sure that, and you just laugh, so humour
Yes.
is another way of getting your
Yes.
messages, and to make sure that there is an element of understanding
Absolutely.
in that topic area.
Absolutely. Well, perhaps staying with the softness or hardness of communication, then we could look perhaps from my perspective in terms of I'm born in Australia but of European parents, Italian parents. I'm also a Italian citizen as well as an Australian citizen. But often in my career, I've found that when I'm with Europeans, they talk in a more blunt way, as distinct from what we traditionally say was the original Australian culture, which was, as I say, influenced very much by the US and English culture. And so occasionally when I'm at a meeting with Europeans, I might have an Australian come up to me and say, "Oh, is everything okay?" That sounded quite aggressive, you know, the tone of that meeting. And I have to say, no, that Europeans, whether they're Italians or French or Eastern Europeans, they've certainly got a different tone in their voice. And so you have to be aware of that as an employee, because if you've got a manager from one of those cultures and that sharpness comes across, then no, that manager's it's not a case of not being happy with you, it's a case of understanding that that's their normal tone. But have you noticed that with some of the countries that you've worked in?
Very much. Some countries I've worked in, I'm not going to name them on this occasion, but we sort of go round the houses before we actually get a definite decision or a definite answer. And again, won't name the country, but you seem to go to the highest level of that particular institution to get an answer, yes or no. So the people below will not give you an answer. They'll sort of fluff it up a little bit until you get to the very top. The top gives the answer, and then eventually it cascades back down.
Yes.
So I think what we're saying there is you need to understand what culture is, what would work for you in that particular situation and in that particular scenario. And that's one of the keys to doing business and doing business well, understanding who you're doing business with.
Yes.
There's all sorts of different things where people say, "Oh, don't shake hands with." I was trying to think of the Japanese culture there. You wouldn't shake hands; you give a business card.
Yes.
I've been to somewhere where someone gave me a business card. I didn't have one left.
Right.
And I felt awkward, and I was a little bit sort of on the back foot about it all. So please just think about, you know, if you're going to talk to people at a high level or even colleagues, make sure that you're prepared for those meetings. Don't just turn up and sort of be unprepared. A little bit like our conversation today, we're going to see where we end up talking. But it's very difficult to sort of just get off the plane and go into a conversation with a business person and not know what you're walking into. I think the unpreparedness is always seen.
Yes.
So you do need to be very mindful
Yes.
of who you're going to be working with, etc. And when you say about the sharpness of the Europeans, I think that's something I sort of see when I come out of Europe and I see Europeans in different situations. But it's the going around the houses that can be quite difficult, because all you want sometimes is an answer.
Yes.
And you don't necessarily get the answer there and then. Or the time taken as well to get the answer can be quite difficult. I think Europeans tend to like the answer now. And they do get a little bit worried if it's not the answer they were looking for as well. So you do have to be careful with that one. But yeah, I take on board your point there, because I think that's quite an interesting one.
Absolutely. And just staying with that theme of the urgency of getting an answer, of course, then if we can move to the theme of teams and how teams different, that, you know, how you manage teams in different cultures. And maybe I can give a very old example, which I used to give to my students many years ago, was when the US and Canada and Mexico entered into the NAFTA agreement, a lot of US companies moved to Mexico. And so you had these senior leaders who were US trained, US educated. They would go to Mexico, and then they would walk the shop floor and they would be asking their employees, "Now, what do you think of this? And what do you think of this?" And of course, no one actually gave them any answers, and if they did give them answers, they never highlighted any problems. So the American manager thought it's all good, the shop floor is working well, the production line is absolutely perfect, and then of course, you know, before you knew it, the cars rolled off the production line or whatever it might be, and there were problems with everything. And the employees knew there were problems, but they didn't speak up because it was a different culture, and what they wanted was they were used to team-based voices. So they, as an individual, didn't want to tell the American manager there's a problem with the production line here or there. They wanted to be able to have teams and as convey the team is concerned about this problem. So have you experienced that in some of the countries that you've knowledgeable in?
I think so, yes. So looking particularly into the Middle East, you need to be aware of teams tend to sort of not be a team in the way that we would necessarily know a team in European culture. There seems to be quite a lot of collectivism. So the team could be this extended team. Rather than the 4 or 5 people you're working with, it's not necessarily those 4 or 5 individuals as one team. You might find it's almost a department size. It could be 30, 40, 50 people, all involved in those interactions. So you don't necessarily get, as you say, the one voice. And that's the one voice that the managers often want to hear. They want to make those decisions based on what is going before them. So again, it comes back to speaking up, speaking out, who in the team represents the team. Because in that example you gave, somebody somewhere would have said something at some point. So who does the manager go to within that team? So it's having that spokesperson, having somebody who would not necessarily be awkward, perhaps, talking to the manager, and have the confidence to talk to the manager as well. So yes, I think, again, it depends where you go. Some of the people that I've worked with have become a bit more, I hate to say the word Western, but they're starting to see that smaller teams tend to work a bit better than these huge collective teams. But if you break the collective teams down into sections, quite often then the sections will work in micro teams, and then they pull together to make the departmental team. So that's almost going back to the sort of traditional way of doing business many, many moons ago. So we've sort of gone from individual, team, department, and they're sort of contracting back again into the individual.
Yes.
But you do need to have those skills that you're aware of, the circumstances you're moving into. How do you deal with those situations? How do you get what you need out of it? And also to be mindful of what the other person wants out of that interaction. So you say the managers went away with very little, if any, information that was useful. I'm sure they got plenty of information that was not useful. But it's surely the managers would understand that they need to have that.
Yes.
With the I said students, with the workers. It's quite important to have that understanding.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's look at decision making now, both for short-term and long-term decision making. And certainly when I was at Stanford University in that part of the US around Silicon Valley, that's where I suddenly realised. Yes, the US culture and that culture of Silicon Valley, and I can understand why this would be the case. It was very short-term orientated. They were interested in seeing results in 3 months or 6 months. And that's not what I was used to in many of my previous examples. So I sort of give you an example. Where I currently live in Perth, Western Australia. In the 1980s, a Japanese company bought a lot of real estate in Perth. And what's happened with around that real estate is Perth is more than doubled in size, tripled in size over that period of time. It's now a population of about 2.3 million, as distinct from about 800,000.
Yep.
So all of these pieces of land around where the Japanese purchased and still own have been developed. And when people say to the Japanese company, so when are you developing that? The response will be, well, we know that when we've had it for 100 years.
Wow.
And, they're only 40 years or 45 years into this. So they'll let us know what they're going to do with that in 55 years from now. Because it got such a long-term perspective. But as I say, my period at Stanford, it was all about how quick can this company get up and running, and how quick can we go from a startup to a unicorn, and they're talking months, years at most, certainly not decades. What's been your experience?
I think for me, it's a little bit more, I haven't actually spent an awful lot of time in the States, but from my understanding of it, it's this short-termism compared to the long-termism of the Japanese, which staggers me to think that there's parcels of land sitting in Perth that are just waiting to be developed. Must be quite frustrating for the locals as well.
Absolutely.
But again, in business, you need to be very mindful of what is the next big thing. What do people want and what do people need? And as we know, most people don't really understand what it is that they actually need, but we will give them what they want to succeed, etc. And in business, you need to be very careful if you're making a product or if you're providing a service. it's no good just to be with everybody else. You want to take that next step. You want to be the person who's leading. You want to be that first company. So having world-class facilities, having the best possible people in that room that you can have in that room to do the work and to direct the work. And really, what do you want to get out of it? It's not all about profit anymore. We've got sustainability agenda, we've got EDI, the equity, diversity, inclusion, all comes into play here. So we need to be careful of, what are we doing now that's going to build for the generations, for our children, for our grandchildren? What are they going to have? Because business is going to look very different in 10, 15, 20 years' time. I imagine if we came back to Perth in 100 years, I wonder what it would look like. Yes. Will those parcels of land still be there?
Yes.
Or will they be built upon? So it's how you perceive the business to be is my sort of thought on that.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we can look at that concept of individualism and collectivism.
Okay.
And some time ago, a world-class researcher, Hofstede, looked at various cultures and at the extreme, end, you would have the US with its individualistic approach, and then some of the Asian cultures at the other extreme end with their collectivist approach. So understanding that becomes, important in terms of building on what we previously said about the short-term, long-term sort of decision-making. But that individualism and collectivism in a time of working from home, how does that play out? Because that individualistic culture, you would probably say a lot more people who are used to that are very comfortable working from home. But if you've got a collectivist culture, by nature, you really need to be engaging more with your colleagues. And we do know that the best form of engagement, I suppose, typically is your face-to-face. But if we're moving to working from home, from an education perspective, of course, we're moving to online. I think most cases now you'll have the majority of students really wanting to engage online. So how have you seen that play out in your experience, that individualism, collectivism, both in the workplace as well as education?
It's really interesting you asked that. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine who works for the CIPD, which is our HR body in the UK, and she totally works from home. She goes to the office once a month, usually for a massive team meeting, and she absolutely loves it. She gets more work done. She's seen her productivity go up. She was comparing recently what she was doing before COVID, during COVID, and now post-COVID. And her productivity has gone up significantly. She loves her job more. She likes meeting her people once a month. And she's really thrived in that environment. And I've also had friends and family members who obviously forced to go online during COVID. And now they're being asked to come back into the office 3, 4, 5 days a week. And they're hating it. And I don't know why. They sort of come back to me and go, oh, it's the travel, it's the commuting. I don't feel as productive. And I think there's this misconception, almost this misalignment of just because you're travelling 2-3 hours a day commuting, that's not unproductive time. There's plenty you can do, unless you're driving, of course. But if you're on the train or if you're going in another mode, there's work you can do in that time frame. So try not to think of it as being unproductive. And even if you're sitting on the train and reflecting on what you've done that day, that's still a good process to go through.
Absolutely.
Start to think about how it's going to go. So the future of all of this, I don't know. I think we'll end up with some sort of hybrid model that works for the employers, works for the employees, and works for the individuals themselves. And I think that's the key here. If you've got the right people in the right place at the right time, you'll have a successful business. But you need to make sure your people are happy and you're looking after your people and they're still having face-to-face activity.
Absolutely.
Even if it's once a month. Or I don't think Teams is a great activity when you have many, many people on the call. 5 or 6 people is probably the most you should have for a productive team meeting. But you can't get away from having those experiences with colleagues, face to face, even the coffee water cooler moments where you might be chatting to somebody about something and you find out something amazing that you didn't know before. It's just, why would you want to give that up? I find that quite challenging.
Yes.
But some people absolutely think that productivity is everything. But in my mind, it's not about that. You need to be a human first.
Absolutely.
The employer employs the human. And if the human is doing a really wonderful job and thriving in that situation, then the business will thrive. As I say, happy people are happy companies.
Absolutely. And that idea of, we used to all be very familiar with the birthday parties, yes, it's that time of the, it's your birthday, you bring in the cake or someone brings in the cake for you.
Yeah, the customs.
The customs around that. Yeah. And, some of those are vanishing and sometimes very difficult to see replicated online. But the other thing that's really changing is the ability of the mobile, that how mobile is the employee, a time where you grew up in a particular city and probably spent all of your working career in that city. Occasionally, you would have things to do in other countries and get on the plane, etc., etc. Now it does seem as if the workforce is looking for that mobility to perhaps be educated in one country and then move to another country. And this is, I suppose, the great thing about affordable education now, the affordable education that we do see with, Oxford College of Business, where it's opened up the opportunity for so many more people to be educated, be university educated, but not necessarily to stay in that city or that country that they've been educated, because they have a global degree and the ability to take that degree really anywhere because it's recognised. So perhaps you can, talk about how you've seen that mobility in the workforce, particularly with that having that recognised global qualification.
That's a really interesting point. We had a faculty event around Christmas time, and we sat there. There were 130 people in attendance, and we worked out that the people in attendance came from over 90 different countries. And that's just in one big department, for want of a better way of putting it. So the diversity in that group, everyone has degrees, master's degrees, some people have PhDs, DBAs, all of these amazing qualifications. But it just shows you how portable that qualification is. And you'll never regret having a degree. A degree opens a door that is otherwise not available to even look at if you don't have a degree. So if you have that degree, you can become anything you want to be. And those professionalities that come behind that. So if you want to go into academia, if you want to be a manager, if you want to be a senior leader, I think you need that rigour behind you to understand what is happening in the workplace and with your colleagues. So it's a wonderful thing to have, and it's wonderful that you can take it wherever you want to go and end up in these diverse communities. As you mentioned at the very beginning, with Perth changing as much as you said about having different diverse cultures, etc., in one place. That seems to be the way the world is at the moment, and it's so exciting.
It is.
It really is exciting to see people from all over the world. Absolutely.
It does remind me of a really thrilling occasion I had in my career when I had the opportunity in the relatively early days of Facebook and going out to their campus, I think it's called, and on Hackers Drive. It's a lovely name, Hackers Drive.
Excellent.
And you went into their canteen where the organisation provides free meals, etc., for its employees, and it was the United Nations. It really was absolutely the United Nations.
Yeah.
And then you see why these companies are so successful, because they have all of these cultures all integrating all the ideas and different ways of doing things. And so then when the Facebook, a company of the world, goes out and wants to engage through social media, they're able to do that because their workforce understands those different cultures and how engagement occurs. So yeah, it's a really exciting world where people can get that degree and take it and move from country to country.
Yeah.
Well, look, really thank you, Tracy. It was been a wonderful conversation that we've had today, and really thrilled that we've been able to be part of this new series, Oxford College of Business, the Insight Dialogue. So again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to listening to further episodes in this series. But thanks again.
And thank you, Tony. Thank you for leading us in our conversation. It's been absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to see what comes next. It's very exciting. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, great.